All right. Good morning, family. Today we will be in Zechariah chapter 9, dealing with the first 8 verses. And the title for today's message is Hope in God's Justice. This is going to be the main idea that we repeat throughout the entirety of today's study. Now, you have a handout in front of you. Let me just briefly explain that here at the outset. You see there's Israel, the nations, and God's remnant listed. This is a place for you to take notes, tracking how God treats Israel, how God treats the nations, and how God treats his remnant. These are the 3 main characters of our study today, and we're going to do a little something with that later. So just be tracking notes through the study and even of your own knowledge from the scriptures of the ways that you see God treating his people Israel, the nations, and his remnant. Okay? Now, let's zoom in on our big idea for today, hope in God's justice. If you've read the passage, you've seen all this language of God is coming to judge the nations. And I think at times we can get caught up with all of the details that we miss the big idea. And the big idea is that the nations and God's people Israel should hope in God's coming justice. Now, we want to connect with this deeply, not just let it be something that's in the scriptures, this thousands of year old text, but something that relates to our lives today. So let's make it personal. We need to hope in God's justice because we ask questions like, how long, O Lord? I want you to think of an injustice that has been committed against you, or an injustice in this world of brokenness and sin that you face that makes you ask the following questions. How long, O Lord? Have you allowed this to happen? Why, God? Do you see me? Have you forsaken me? Do you remember your promise? Am I forgotten? Why do the wicked prosper? These are questions pulled directly from the scriptures. The psalmists ask this, the prophets ask this, the kings of Israel ask this. Even some of the disciples ask these same questions. So I want you to think of an injustice in this world that burdens you, that makes you ask one of these questions, and hold on to that. We're going to come back to that later. But clearing all of that away, we remember our main point is to hope in God's justice, knowing that the justice that is coming in the future should give us a hope that makes us live different today. We're all about application here at BenDavid, and we're putting the application at the front, that we live a life that reflects the hope that we have in God. So, the ministry of the prophets. This is a slide that I've shown every week in our Zechariah study throughout, and I said next time there would be a quiz, and the quiz is today. Indeed. So I'm going to place up there the point, but the key word is missing. So you've seen this line, and you have to fill in the key word. So the ministry of the prophets is to uphold the covenant. Yeah, somebody said law. Now that's good. This is what we normally think of with the prophets. But they uphold the covenant. The covenant communicates not just the rules and regulations, but the relationship. Now, if you're taking good notes on the sheet provided to you, this would be your first point under Israel, that God treats Israel in covenant relationship. I'll give you the first one for free. The other ones you may have to figure out more on your own. All right, next question. The ministry of the prophets is to bring blank against Israel and the nations. That is to bring... This is the hard one, isn't it? The hint here is they act like covenant lawyers. They bring justice, and specifically the word we're looking for is indictments. They're like a covenant lawyer, and they say, here's the lawsuit against you for violating the law of God. So they're acting as covenant lawyers. Next, this is a twofold answer. They bring a message of blank and blank. So they bring a message of hope and salvation is good. The 2 words we're looking for here are comfort and hope. We're comforted by the justice of God because it's coming in the future. We can live a life of hope now because of the future realities we will one day see. Now there's 4 components to this. message of comfort and hope. The first is, we just sang of it, of the coming Messiah. Good. Then we have 3 points of restoration. The first is of the restored kingdom. So the kingdom, the restored kingdom, there's 2 components to this. The restored kingdom to Israel, to the people of God who represent God's rule on the earth. But as we'll see in this passage, that rule is going to expand to the whole earth. And it will be that God's rule is over the entire earth and everyone is in God's kingdom. So we have the coming Messiah, the restored kingdom, and of the restored. There's a horizontal and a vertical component to this one. Relationships, good. So the horizontal, the relationship between Israel and the nations, the relationship between brother and brother, sister and sister, brother and sister, mother and father, all of those dynamics, and the vertical relationship between humanity and God. And lastly, of the restored, this is the big one. We have kingdom, biggest picture, global, world. Good. Of the restored world. Okay, I know it's a little hard to get through the quiz when you don't know the answers, but I think memorizing these main points help you understand every prophet in Scripture better. They're all attempting to do these key things. And a lot of these end up being bullet points on your list of how God treats his people. Covenant, but he also brings indictments. He also brings the charge against them. He gives them comfort and hope. He also proclaims a message of the Messiah, a Savior. And he promises restoration of kingdom, relationship, and world. You're not graded on this. This was just for participation credit, and you all passed. All right, synthesis of Zechariah. Big picture, what's going on in this book? We have a theological point of view. That is the lens that we have on for understanding who God is in this book. The most commonly repeated title of God is Adonai Tzvaot, which means Lord of hosts or Lord of heavenly armies. Or as we've seen in this book, he is the Lord of the whole earth. So this is the character of God that we're emphasizing in this text. Then we have a historical point of view. What is the historical background of this book? Exiled Judah is led back to the land to be restored, but that restoration is only partial. It's only the southern tribes. But there's a day coming where all Israel will be restored, and we'll even have the nations coming to Israel for restoration as well. And lastly, our message statement. This is the entire book in one sentence. What is the main point? Well, this jam-packed sentence. Return to Adonai, and he will return to you. For the faithful remnant of Judah will be restored, and all of her adversaries judged, both now and in the future, under the temporarily rejected Messiah King. And we've been working through this message statement throughout the book for many weeks now. But we zoom in on a couple of those lines. The faithful remnant of Judah, that's one character, and the adversaries of Israel being judged. The two main characters of our text today. But that main point has to be the header of both of those. That we hope in God's justice, not just for the faithful remnant and their restoration, but also for the judgment. God is a God of justice, and he has to judge the wicked. And in doing so, he then will protect and preserve his remnant. So, those are the two main points of the message statement that we are focused on today. Now, where are we in the book? We've hit a big transition point, and I think we need to zoom out and do a little assessment. So where have we been in Zechariah? In chapters 1 through 6, we had the visions. And if you remember, the main point of those are to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple and everything that comes along with that. The restoration of the people and the priesthood so that they would have a temple and God would dwell among them. Then in chapters 7 and 8, where we've been for the last few weeks, we had a twofold message. First, that fasting to feasting. We would have a movement where the fasting, recognizing the mourning for the destruction of Jerusalem, would be transformed into a time of joy and feasting. That's the expectation. But the way to get there is to set your motivation right. And that's covered in this bullet point. To show true justice. That is, show true justice to your neighbor, to one another. So that's where we've been. That's what we've done in our study so far. Now we ask the question, where are we going? We're at the transition point here in chapter 9. Chapter 9 talks of judgment of the nations and Israel's coming king. Zechariah sets up a need for a solution in 1 through 8, and he's starting to give us the solution starting now in chapters 9 to the end of the book. In chapter 10, it speaks of the restoration of Israel. In chapter 11, it talks of the rejection of the true shepherd of Israel. God's desire is to restore her, but rejection will come first. But then in chapter 12, we turn to a hopeful note and we see the acceptance of the Messiah, a Messiah who would die. And then in the final chapters, 13 through 14, we have the cleansing of Israel and the day of Adonai, this theme in the prophets, the day where God will right all of the wrongs in the world. So in chapters 1 through 8, we have the need for the solution, and then we have the solution in 9 through 14, that the Messiah will come and rule the whole earth. So chapter 9 marks this transition point in the book. We're preparing for the solution that Zechariah, as well as us, have waited so long to provide, the coming judgment and king of Israel. We have a movement from the hope of Israel to its realization. Not just the prophecy of hope, but it actually coming. So let us investigate Zechariah's answer in the text to this question that we asked. How long, O Lord? So starting in verse 1 of chapter 9. The oracle of the word of Adonai is against the land of Hadrach, and Damascus is its resting place. For Adonai has an eye on mankind and all the tribes of Israel. Here you should be able to jot down at least 2 points. That Adonai has an eye on mankind, that is the nations, and on the tribes of Israel. We sung this morning. He who keeps Israel doesn't slumber nor sleep. He sees Israel, but he also sees the nations. And this is important for where the text is headed. All right, moving into verse 2. And on Hamath also, which borders on it, Tyre and Sidon, though they are very wise. Tyre has built herself a rampart and heaped up silver like dust and fine gold like the mud of the streets. But behold, the Lord will strip her of her possessions and strike down her power on the sea, and she shall be devoured by fire. So this is the judgment on the nations language that we're talking about. And you can do a study and zoom in on these different places like Tyre and Sidon. Just know that the other prophets have a lot to say on this too. For instance, Tyre is the pinnacle of pride in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 8, and is even compared to our adversary, Hasatan, Satan, the devil, whatever you want to call him. The pinnacle of pride is represented in this nation. And God is coming and going to strip her of her possessions and her power. No longer will the nations have the upper hand. That's really the point here. All right, moving into verse 5. Ashkelon shall see it and be afraid. Gaza too, and shall writhe in anguish. Ekron also, because its hopes are confounded. The king shall perish from Gaza. Ashkelon shall be uninhabited, and a mixed people shall dwell in Ashdod. And I will cut off the pride of Philistia. So, zooming into these, we have Ashkelon, Gaza, we're familiar with that one, Ekron, and Ashdod. This is 4 of the 5 cities of the Philistines called the Pentapolis, the 5 cities. Only one is missing. Actually, that would be Gath, which is where Goliath came from. But these are key figures in the scriptures, especially in the early texts like Judges and Samuel, nations that oppose Israel and come against them and war against them. This is a big part of the beginning of Scripture. Now, these are mentioned, but really the focus is the pride of Philistia, the pride of the Philistines. And God, in judging these nations, in bringing these old enemies of Israel back up, is to say that the persecutors of Israel will face judgment. They will not be able to come against God's people and get off scot-free. Now, Gaza is of extreme importance in our lives today, with a war and hostages taken some 300 days ago. So when you see a text like this and you read, the judgment is coming against Gaza, you ask, when? I don't know that I see that today, right? And we start to struggle, and this is where we have to let it be personal and dive deep into the text. So let's do that. Let's zoom in on this topic of judgment on the nations. The adversaries of Israel are judged. This is the focus. Notice this. In chapter 7, Israel is called to show true justice toward others. That was the whole point through chapters 7 and 8. But there's a contrast with what God does with justice. God executes true justice on their neighbors. But Israel's focus is to be internal, that you show justice in your midst, and God will deal with it on the outside. It is not our responsibility, it is not Israel's responsibility to look at the nations and say, this is how I would do justice. God, destroy them like this, because that's what I want to see. He says, no, leave true justice to the nations, to me, but show justice that reflects my character in your midst, to your brothers, to your sisters, and your mothers and your fathers. So our point, hope in God's justice and live it out. Live it out in your life today with the people closest to you. You're going to have an opportunity to do that today with your neighbor. So make sure you're sitting close to somebody for our closing activity. So you probably ask the question, like many of the prophets do, why? Why does God need to judge the nations, and why in this way? The nations did what was abhorrent to Adonai. All of the things that they do become an example of what Israel is not supposed to do. Much of the rules and regulations in Torah are exactly what the nations were doing. Don't look like them. Don't eat the things they eat. Don't kill the animals the way they kill them. Don't have sacrifices that look like their sacrifices. Don't even wear clothes that they wear. Look different, be distinct. Look like my people, not like them. Not like everybody else. This is what this separate, holy, sanctified distinction thing that's going on in the Torah is all about. Because what the nations did was abhorrent. The nations also mocked Israel. If you read the scriptures, you will see how combative the nations are to Israel throughout their history. And Israel is by no means perfect, but even when they are representing God rightly, the nations oppose them. And at the fall of Israel, when they are exiled, the nations mock and laugh at Israel for their downfall. Do you think that changed the nation's attitude toward the God of Israel? Do you think that the nations might be thinking the God of Israel is a failure? Maybe they come to the attitude that the nations think that their gods won. That the gods of the Canaanites or other Mesopotamian gods won over Adonai. This cannot be the case. Therefore, it is not just for the restoration of Israel, but for God's own character and integrity that he must judge the nations. God's justice defeats the pride of the nations and fulfills the hope of Israel. This is the weight of God's justice and why we pray for it daily. Another question we might be asking is, when is this judgment fulfilled? Are we talking in the future or in the past? So I ask you, who votes this has already happened in the past? Raise your hand. All right, who votes this is coming in the future? Well, you're all right and a little wrong. Or maybe you understand the nuance here. Many of these nations are conquered under Alexander the Great, so that it would be in the past. That is, in the future from Zechariah's point of view, but for us, some of these nations have already been conquered. One example might be that Ashdod is under Israel's control today. You can actually see on the map this name that we saw in our passage. It's under Israeli control. But Gaza is not. So I might have some movement, but it's not complete. It is not the judgment on the nations that would fully satisfy the justice of God that we wouldn't have to ask, how long, O Lord? Is this all you're going to do with the nations? So we have a yes and. We have a yes in the past, but also in the future. And so often that is true with the prophets. Let's resume in our text, picking up in verse 7 on the remnant. I will remove the blood from his mouth, forbidden food from between his teeth. Whoever is left will be a remnant for God. He will be like a leader in Judah, and Ekron will be like a Jebusite. Let's take this phrase by phrase to understand what's happening in this last verse. So I will remove the blood from his mouth and forbidden food from between his teeth. The point here is that no longer will the enemies of Israel be unclean and perform abhorrent rituals. So one of the reasons God judges them is because of their abhorrent behavior. But God is saying, I will take the initiative to remove that from among the nations, that they would no longer do the things that bring my wrath upon them. So that's the first phrase. This second phrase, whoever is left, that is left from the nations God is judging, will be a remnant for our God. So you're doing this comparison right now on your sheet of Israel and the nations, but now we have this new category introduced of the remnant of God. Now you might be able to put some bullet points down. Israel's enemies will be counted among Israel's remnant to God. This is a radical change in the story. No longer will this headbutting and fighting between Israel and the nations be the only way that the scriptures read. There will be a turning point where Israel and the nations can walk in the same direction in agreement. And I think all of us here know what the solution to that problem is. It's the coming Messiah. He will bring this movement that the nations would actually be allies to Israel and not just enemies. So we have partial fulfillment in salvation for the nations in Yeshua. When he comes, he doesn't just offer salvation to Israel. He offers salvation even to the Gentiles, even to the nations. But I say this as a partial fulfillment because we still have issues of nations warring against Israel. And verse 8 won't allow that to be the case, as we'll see in a moment. So we look for a fuller fulfillment. That is, the full fulfillment in the coming Messianic kingdom. So in our quiz, we say that there's the restoration, there's the coming of the Messiah, but there's the restoration of the kingdom, and then there's the restoration of relationships in the world. The kingdom is incredibly important here, because it's when this prophecy comes to the fullest fulfillment that it will have. All right, moving to this last little phrase, that Ekron will be like a Jebusite. Now, if you remember your biblical history, you probably already know where this is going, but let's review. From Judges chapter 1, verse 21, the text reads, "And the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem unto this day." So this is one nation, but you see this nation is treated uniquely to the other enemies of Israel. The call is not for them to utterly be destroyed and pushed out of the land, but they're actually allowed to stay in the land. So also, Israel's enemies, talked in this passage, will dwell with Israel worshiping in Jerusalem. This is not what so many people are calling a genocidal movement of Zionists, to kill everybody that won't leave Jerusalem. That isn't the point. The expectations from the prophets is that the nations will worship with Israel in Jerusalem. It is not about exclusion of the nations, it's about unique inclusion, because the God of Israel is the God of the world. And that's always been the focus of the scriptures. All right, let's go to our last verse of the text, verse 8. "But I, Adonai, will camp around my house against marauding forces. No oppressor will overrun them again, for now I watch with my own eye." In the beginning, the opening verse, we see that the Lord has an eye on all mankind and all the tribes of Israel. And then he repeats this exact same idea to close out this passage, that he is watching with his eyes. He's watching Israel, he's watching the nations, and he's especially watching his remnant. A remnant that isn't just from Israel, but will even be from the nations. When he says he will camp around his house, this language of house brings us back to the opening of the book, that God will rebuild his temple and dwell in Jerusalem with his people. No oppressor will overrun them again. Have we seen oppressors overrun Israel? Throughout all of their history, there is never a moment where there isn't somebody gunning after them. So this is where we say there may be partial fulfillment, but a fuller fulfillment is coming in the future, when this verse will be so true that Israel no longer has to worry. Where swords can be beaten into plowshares, they can be turned into farming tools and not meant to defend against war. It will no longer be necessary on that day. So the remnant. We've been talking about the remnant through Zechariah, especially in chapter 8. The message was, let the hand of the remnant be strong. And now we're zooming in on the remnant, not exclusively thinking of Israel, but now even thinking of the nations being a part of this. This is a unique movement. So let's do a comparison of the nations versus the remnant. Now, look on your sheet. Let's just take a moment to reflect. How does God treat the nations? I expect that you have things down such as judgment, removal, exile, punishment, wrath. Then ask, how does God treat Israel? I assume you have many of the same things. God punishes Israel. He's exiled them from the land. He's allowed warring forces to come against them. But what is the big, unique difference on your sheet between the way God treats the nations and the way God treats Israel? It was the first point of our quiz. Covenant. God doesn't make covenant with the nations at this point in Scripture. He makes covenant exclusively with Israel. And that covenant guarantees a lot. It's actually why we are together as a Messianic congregation. We believe in the validity of that covenant today. Then we come to this last question. How does God treat his remnant? Now you see, there's a funnel happening where there will be a remnant from Israel, there's a remnant from the nations, and all of God's remnant will be in covenant relationship. And this is the movement in the story that is so radical when the Messiah comes and he says, I'm here to institute a new covenant. And in that instituting of the new covenant, a covenant he made with Israel and promised with Israel back in the days of Jeremiah, but he starts talking about the Gentiles being included. And he's pulling them in to be a part of the kingdom alongside Israel. This is a unique movement forward in the story. So when we think of the nations versus Israel, we should always also be thinking of the remnant, because they are a unique player on this scene. One big difference as well is there's destruction with the nations, but there's protection of God's remnant. God protects Israel, but he protects the remnant even from the nations as well. A quote from a commentary, the New American Commentary, that puts this beautifully. For Zechariah to prophesy that Israel's tribes will worship again envisions a glorious eschatological, that is end time, in which Israel, lost and dispersed among the nations, would turn to the Lord along with her formerly idolatrous neighbors. Isn't that beautiful? That even if Israel turns away or the nations turn away, God has a plan to bring all of them back to him. So a couple points on the remnant. Remember that God always keeps a remnant. He has never failed to do that. And what is the line that's always said, especially by the churches that believe Israel was replaced? Israel rejected her Messiah. That's why. That's why Israel faces what they do, because they rejected her Messiah. But then I would challenge you with this. But the nations first rejected Israel. The nations were to receive salvation and the kingdom because Israel represented God's rule on the earth as a holy nation and a kingdom of priests who represented the character of God. But consistently throughout Israel's history, the nations rejected Israel. But what is our hope? One day, both will be reversed. Israel will accept her Messiah, and the nations will accept Israel. And no longer will there be hostility in either of those camps. The nations and Israel will be united because of the Messiah. So, I brought up this language before, but it's relevant again. Justice versus just-ish. And this is what we so often get in this world. And unfortunately, it's a problem of our own making. The point is, hope in God's justice, but we choose fear and a justice of our own making. And what's the danger in a justice of our own making? Well, I suggest 3 points. Our evaluation of justice is self-centered. What I think justice is, how I think it should look, what would satisfy me. Our need for justice is to satisfy revenge. Rarely does it come from a good place. When we're looking for just-ish, we're looking for something temporal, we're looking for something in this world, and we're looking only from our perspective. And lastly, our bringing of justice, how we execute justice, is what is right in our own eyes. We've heard this language before in the scriptures, yes? And how did that go? In the time of the judges, this was the big issue. We did what was right in our own eyes, and we brought more pain, suffering, and death into the world. So our hope is in God's justice and not our own. There is justice in Messiah, that he died in our place, taking on the full wrath of God undiluted. There is the full satisfaction of God's justice in that moment and in precisely one other place. There is justice in eternal punishment. For those who do not choose to allow the work of the Messiah to take on the wrath that they deserve, they will then take on that wrath. And they'll take it on to satisfy God's eternal justice in his place of punishment. I know there's diversity of views on this, but I believe that justice exists in precisely two places, and everything else is an imperfect just-ish. And if you're striving after justice in this world, and you will never be satisfied with the just-ish that the world will provide you. We have a legal system, but it's a system that we've created, and it's in many ways arbitrary. And every culture has done this since the beginning of the world. But there is one objective place of justice, and that's in God. And he has provided two solutions, and I hope you choose the first. Let us prepare to release justice to these. Release justice to the work of the Messiah, or to God's deeming worthy of justice in his eternal punishment, and no longer hold on to them and trying to bring justice in the world. So as we do this, as we move into application, we are going to be practical, provable, and personal. Now, normally I give you a setup, and I say, as you leave, go and do this. Today, you don't get the luxury of doing it later. We're going to do it now. I asked you at the beginning of this to think, what is an injustice against me, or an injustice in this world that burdens me so heavily? We're going to release that. So think back of that and identify an injustice against you. And please turn to your neighbor and release this injustice in prayer. You can be as explicit or as general as you want, but let's actually get these things out. And if you're lost and you don't know where to go, one big injustice in the world right now is what Hamas is doing against Israel. And I'm sure we can all unite in releasing that to the justice of God and not a justice of our own making. So let us release this injustice in prayer with your neighbor. And then after they've prayed that, pray for the strengthening of your neighbor's faith, because they just did something intimate and personal and painful. And then I will come back and close us. Please just take a couple of minutes to do this little prayer activity with your neighbor. It is my hope that you continue in this as injustice weighs on you, that you would continue to pray with one another, not just to release the injustice, but to strengthen one another. And as I say so often when we close, spiritually link arms with your brothers and sisters and walk forward holding one another accountable, building each other up to better reflect the character of God. Let's close in prayer. I want to read a prayer from, actually, the Amidah prayer that is so relevant here. Father, behold, please, our afflictions, take up our grievance and speedily redeem us with a complete redemption for your name's sake. For you, O God, are the powerful Redeemer. Blessed are you, Adonai, Redeemer of Israel. And Father, we know that from your scriptures you are a Redeemer of the whole world. We pray for your justice, and we pray for your justice to come quickly. We pray all of this in the will of our Father, in the power of your Spirit, and in the name of the Messiah, whose name is salvation. And all the people of God say, Amen.